Welcome to Learning with UNP. In this session of Python for Data Science, we are going to understand about input function that includes what is an input function and what is a white space. Let's first understand about input function. Input function in Python is a built-in function that allows you to interact with the user by accepting input from them. It is commonly used to obtain user input such as text or numerical values during the execution of a program. In simple terms, input function allows you to ask a user to type some sort of information into the program and to save that information into a variable that the program can process. Let's look at key concepts of input function. First comes basic syntax. The basic syntax of input function is input, that is prompt. This prompt is taken as an argument, which is a string that is displayed to the user before accepting their input. In simple terms, you can provide a message called a prompt that will be shown on the screen before the user types their response. The function then waits for the user to type something and press enter. Now, let's look at user input. The input function reads the user input as a string. It takes what the user types and gives it back as a string. You can store this string in a variable to use later. You can convert string to other data types as needed. To convert a string that represents a whole number into an actual integer, use the int function. To convert a string that represents a decimal number into an actual float, use the float function. To convert a string into boolean, that is true or false, is a bit more complex since Python doesn't have a simple bool function for strings. You have to write a bit of extra code to check the string's content to decide if it should be true or false. Now let's look at prompting the user. You can provide a message called as prompt to guide the user on what type of input is expected, and then the prompt is displayed as a message or question before the user enters their input. Let's now look at the pseudocode representation of it. Step 1. Decide what information you need from the user. Means decide what you need to ask the user. Step 2. Use the input function to prompt the user for input. Means use the input function to ask for their input. Step 3. Optionally, provide a message inside the input function to prompt the user with a specific question or instruction. Means optionally include a message in the input function to guide the user. Step 4. Store the user input in a variable. Means save the user's response in a variable. Step 5. If necessary, convert the user input to the appropriate data type using type conversion functions like int, float, etc. Means, if needed, convert the response to the right data type with functions like int or float. Step 6. Use the user input in your program as needed. Means use the user's input in program as we want to do it. Here are examples related to input function. First example demonstrates accepting and displaying user input. In here, the program asks user to enter their name using input enter your name. Whatever the user types is stored in the variable name. The program then prints a greeting using the name the user entered with the print statement given here. Let's execute and check. Let's enter a name as Sam and then click enter. It gave, "Hello Sam, nice to meet you." Now let's look at second example. Second example demonstrates converting user input to a numerical value. This program asks the user to enter their age using input enter your age. The input is then stored as a string in the variable age. The program converts the string to an integer using int of age. It then calculates the user's age in 10 years and then prints the results with print statement. Let's execute this. Let's enter age as 20. Click enter. The output is in 10 years you will be 30 years old. It's correct. Now let's look at third example. Third example demonstrates using user input in calculations. The program asks the user to enter the radius of a circle using input enter the radius of a circle. Whatever the user types is treated as a string initially. The float function converts the string to a decimal number because radius is usually a number that can have decimal values. The converted radius is then stored in the variable radius. The program calculates the area of the circle using the given formula. Now it stores the result in the variable area. Finally, it prints out the calculated area with print statement. Let's execute it. Let's give the radius as 4 and click enter. The area of the circle when the radius is 4 is 50.24. Now let's go to the last example. Fourth example demonstrates accepting multiple inputs. In this, the program asks the user to input their name with input enter your name. Whatever the user types is stored as name. Then it asks the user to input their age with input enter your age. Whatever the user types is treated as number, specifically an integer, because of int input enter your age. This integer input is then stored in the variable age. Finally, it prints out the name and the age of the user using print name statement and print age statement. Let's execute this. Let's enter name as Sam again. Click enter. Let's enter age as 30. Click enter. Name is Sam, age is 30. This is all about input functions. Finally, let's look at whitespace in Python. Python uses white spaces for code organization. We must use consistent indentation to different blocks of codes such as loops and conditional statements. Whitespace is simply a character that is used for spacing and has an empty representation. It refers to tabs and spaces in the context of Python. Whitespace indentation and spacing is crucial in Python for defining the program structure. Unlike many other programming languages that use curly braces to indicate blocks of code, Python uses whitespace to determine the scope and hierarchy of code blocks. In Python, proper indentation is essential to make the code readable and to ensure that the correct statements are executed within their respective blocks. Let's now look at important aspects of whitespace usage in Python. First one is indentation. Python uses indentation to define blocks of code. It visually groups statements together, forming blocks. All statements within the same block must be indented consistently, typically by 4 spaces. Although you can also use tabs or different number of spaces as long as you are consistent throughout the code. Second one is indentation error. If you don't indent your code properly in Python, you will likely encounter an error which is called as indentation error. This error happens when Python can't understand your code because the spacing is wrong. Essentially, it means Python gets confused because it expects certain lines to be indented in a specific way, but they are not. So, it's like a signal that tells you to check your indentation and fix it to make your code readable and understandable for Python. Third one is spacing in expressions. While the spaces and tabs you use within lines of code aren't necessary for organizing your code into blocks, they can make your code easier to read. You can use spaces to make expressions more readable. Fourth one is line breaks. In Python, when a line of code gets too long and might be hard to read, you can use a backslash to break long lines of code into multiple lines. This helps keep your code neat and organized, making it easier to understand. It's like breaking a long sentence into smaller, more manageable pieces for better readability. The last one is blank lines. Blank lines are lines that contain no code. They are used to create visual breaks between different parts of your code, making it easier to read and understand. These breaks help separate blocks of code that do different things or are related in some way. However, it's important not to overuse blank lines and only add them where they make sense to keep your code organized and tidy. Finally, whitespace usage in Python isn't just a matter of style, but is a fundamental way to the language syntax and structure. When you indent lines properly and use spaces and tabs consistently, Python can understand your code better. This makes your code easier to read, understand, and maintain, and it helps reduce the chance of making mistakes. So, paying attention to how you format your code isn't just about following rules, it's about making your code work properly and be easier to work with in the long run. This is all about today's lecture. See you in the next lecture. Thank you.